The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before, and as we begin the path to recovery after worldwide disruption, this podcast explores how design industries can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for both their businesses and consumers. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, and your host this week. You're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. This week, it's time once more to turn the spotlight on a brand, business, or individual leading the way in some of the fastest growing trend areas impacting design. In today's episode, I speak to CEO and co-founder of beauty company Deciem, Nicola Kilner. Founded back in 2012, Nicola took the reins as CEO in 2018 and led the business from strength to strength, culminating most recently in a deal for Estee Lauder to buy the brand for a whopping $2.2 billion valuation. I was really excited to speak to Nicola as a very early fan of The Ordinary and Neod, two of Deciem's brands. We actually recorded this conversation just a couple of days before the Lauder purchase was announced, so we weren't able to get into the detail of the deal. However, what we were able to talk about included the impact of seemingly endless Zoom calls on consumers' beauty decisions, the reasons behind creating a social activist manager role within the business, and offering a simplified, uniform product range to a global consumer, among many other things. It was a great conversation with Nicola and really fascinating to speak to her at such an interesting time for the business. So without further ado, let's join the conversation. Hello Nicola, thank you so much for agreeing to be my guest today. So before I get into the nitty-gritty and start grilling you, I have to confess to being a little bit of a fangirl of Deciem. I first bought some of your products online via a website that I was signed up to their mailing list at the time, and they started just eulogising about this new brand and then dragging friends all across London to your store in Spitalfields Market before others watched. And if we were recording this in my bathroom rather than in my stepson's bedroom, you would see many of the products lined up behind. So I feel like I can talk with a degree of authority about your brand, but obviously not with the authority that you can. So let's start actually in the kind of near past. So we're still going through the pandemic, and this has had a massive change on so many different business models, and yours in particular, I would say, is a store that, yes, sold lots of, or a brand, sorry, that sold lots of products online, but had also opened many, many stores and had got lots of fans who would queue up for new releases and things. How have the various lockdowns affected you, and were you able to pivot very quickly, or did it create, huge ructions within the business?
Well, first of all, by the way, thank you for your very kind words. It's always lovely to talk to people that use our products and understand our brand. So thank you for that. And thank you for being one of the early adopters and being one of our first stores. Spitalfield was the first store we ever opened. So a big thank you. And yeah, I think every company, every human, I don't think there's anyone who hasn't been touched by the pandemic. And I think as a business, we were touched in so many different ways. And our first thing was just trying to protect our team. And, we had days and weeks where we didn't know if we'd have to shut down production and how far it would impact us. And I think when it comes to retail, we're probably fortunate that bricks and mortar was probably the smaller part of our channel, and our biggest accounts, including our own direct-to-consumer business, was all online. But we still had 40 stores around the world, and we know consumers loved those experiences. So one of the first things we did quite quickly was launch Deciem at home, and this was driven for a couple of reasons. First of all, we wanted to be able to give our retail team the ability to continue working, because we didn't know how long stores would be closed for, and we're a year later and obviously many of our stores are still shut. So Deciem at Home allowed our retail team to actually do consultations virtually, and we've had amazing feedback, and I think our audience have also enjoyed still having that opportunity to talk with a Deciem ambassador, and actually it's probably allowed that experience to be more than, there's many people who don't live in a city where there is a Deciem store, so they now have access to our trained colleagues, and we've actually noticed, a big increase in our order value through Deciem at Home, so it's kind of showing us that education is really helping our consumers understand our products and kind of what they want to use. And I think we have managed to pivot a lot of our offline consumers to now be our online consumers as well.
There's been lots of headlines about how the beauty industry as a whole has been affected during this time. A lot about, lipstick sales are going down because people are wearing masks, and an awful lot about skincare sales going up because just like we are now, spending an awful lot of time staring at our faces in screens, whereas we used to have at least a few hours of the day when we weren't looking at ourselves. Have you been a beneficiary of that? Have you seen a consumer who is more anxious, perhaps, about how they're looking, and I guess looking to you for answers to that?
So we definitely have been one of the companies that's probably benefited through the pandemic, and it's something that always feels. You feel guilty when there are so many people suffering out there. But I think, with skincare, first of all, because people are wearing less makeup, they are probably paying more attention to their skin because we are all inside so much more. As you said, we're probably looking at ourselves even more because we're on Zoom calls or whatever else each day. But I also think people are having more time perhaps to actually access content because so many of our hobbies and kind of other life interests have probably been put on hold. I think people are actually taking the time to actually research ingredients, and we know The Ordinary is a brand that works very well for people that actually have an interest in learning about ingredients. I think also kind of around a similar time, we noticed a huge uplift in our followers on TikTok, and that actually correlated directly to quite an increase in sales, particularly on our AHA peel and our hair density serum. And again, I think, TikTok has such a powerful voice, especially with kind of Gen Z. And I think the great thing about TikTok is it's quite an uncurated content that I think people very much trust, because I think it feels less sponsored, so to say, than some of the other social platforms. And again, I think all of these things just kind of landed at a place where people probably were also spending more time on screens, more time on Google, more time trying to learn. So I think there are also reasons why skincare has benefited. And I also think probably our price point is a good price point where, again, we know many people have been financially impacted. So I think being at a more transparent price point has probably helped us be one of the benefits within the pandemic too.
I think that's a really interesting topic. We published a white paper last year all about value and how the perception of value is changing through this. So yes, there's a huge amount of financial anxiety, and we don't see that going away anytime soon, especially with kind of global recessions looming. But also our expectation of value in terms of what a brand delivers to us. And in the beauty industry, that might be kind of supersized packaging, or it might be a sort of added delivery. You're getting something more than you would normally expect. Have you come across that? Is that something that's shaping your strategy in any shape or form?
I think it's more than just value. I think people aren't just buying a product anymore. They want to align with a brand. And I think therefore your brand values are so important. And I think, consumers want to know, what are you doing with sustainability? How are you treating your employees? I remember at the start of the pandemic, I don't know if you saw it, there was a huge Google spreadsheet that was kind of being shared, which was kind of just crowdsourced in terms of telling everyone, who's furloughing staff, who's making redundancies, who's keeping people on. And I think actually people have really started to take an interest on, not just what the product is, but who's the company behind it? What are their values? Am I putting my money not just into a product that is good, but actually into the hands of a brand where I believe they're going to do good? And I think, it's something that's always been at the heart of Deciem. We believe that the bigger we grow, the more good we can try and do for the world. And I think especially 2020 was a phenomenal year in terms of even just the natural disasters that were happening. And you'll see we made donations to everything from the Australia fires at the beginning of the year, some of the black protest charities involved, we made donations to there. And I think, again, this is something that consumers, and maybe that is a sense of value, maybe that's just another way that they're now looking into it. And I think, the sustainability piece is going to become really key as well. We're seeing many brands now becoming B Corp. That's starting to become a talking point. It's definitely a journey that we are embarking on. And so I think consumers will start to be looking at more than just the product when it comes to a brand.
To things like donations or putting your money where your mouth is, how much are you led by your consumer and how much are you led by your staff? Who's the kind of driving force behind those decisions?
I'd say probably from immediately it's more driven by the team. And I think our team are just some of the most kind-hearted, just good humans you could ever meet. And I think as soon as something happens, there's just this kind of inherent desire to help. And I think we feel very privileged that we do have the resources now. You know, we only started in 2013. In the first couple of years, we certainly didn't have as much means as we do now. But we definitely take the position we have got to with the responsibility that comes with that. So the fact that we can now support many different things, I think, is something that's so important to us. And we will continue to do that. And I mean, we've just actually recently hired a manager for social activism, because again, we want to kind of have even more focus on those causes around the world. So I think whilst it's kind of driven by our team, because like most things within the brand, you know, we're living and breathing it every day. We're talking about what more we could be doing. But I think it also resonates with our audience. And I guess the reason we continue to do it is not only do we all believe in it, but we know the feedback from our audience is positive. So we know it's something that they want to see us do as well.
I think that's amazing that you've hired someone just in that position. I could see you being something of a trailblazer, that's going to be something that brands really need to think about. They understand that they need to stand for something. That's been, you know, a big buzzword of the past few years. But actually having people whose sole purpose is to ensure that you're doing right in those areas, that you're being active in the right way, I think is really interesting. And
I think, you know, corporates are, you know, they're such huge entities around the world that I think there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And I think, you know, in for so many years, things have been left down to politicians and charities, when actually I think corporations can also play a big role in trying to be the change in the world that we all want to see.
We publish a future consumer report every year that looks 2 years ahead. And there have been a number of kind of personas in that I have talked on stages around the world about the trust levels in government and big corporations has just decreased so significantly. And this was before the pandemic. And the consumer or individuals, let's just call them people, have been looking for answers in different places. And I do think that's where you're seeing some brands do very well just because they've stepped into that void, arguably. And I think if you look back 10 years, the idea that a brand that you buy products from to put in your kitchen or your wardrobe or your bathroom was going to be the answer to the world's, you know, social ills is kind of a fascinating journey that we've all been on.
No, indeed. And yeah, it's just an amazing evolution. And I think that's going to continue. And ultimately, you know, it's a circle, because it actually helps with your brand loyalty, because, you know, it's something where 10 years ago you weren't able to probably gain a loyal audience through doing those kinds of initiatives. Whereas now, when you have that alignment, I think it all kind of circles together. So actually, you can do more good, because then you're kind of keeping your consumers, which then actually powers your resources again. So it's a really positive spiral effect that can happen.
Ask you about something quite different but also linked to the pandemic, and that's this idea of who do we trust. And we've seen big brands, again, some in your space and some in totally different spaces, who have moved from a kind of celebrity-led to a scientist-led. And that's very much an output of the fact that the people who we are putting our trust in, the people we're hearing from more and more, are the scientists. They're the ones on our news programmes. We're listening to them. Our politicians are sometimes listening to them, sometimes not. You've been quite, especially with The Ordinary, I would say very kind of science first. You use very scientific labels for the products. You educate your consumer, but you sort of ask that your consumer educates themselves as well. Again, do you think this has helped you? Is it something now you will push even more, the scientific kind of validity of the products that you put in market?
So that's something that we have done since 2013 and something we will continue to do. And I think, you know, it partly comes down to, we've always said Deciem plays within functional beauty, not emotional beauty. And I think, you know, it's the difference between if you're buying a lipstick, actually seeing the advert on which model it's at and kind of where it is. You know, there are many more emotional, I I think factors that might make you decide whether you want to purchase that lipstick. And, also something like lipstick, you can test it on your hand and you can instantly see the colour that it's going to give you. So it's a very, I think, much more of an emotional transaction. Whereas when it comes to skincare, I feel like there's always been this barrier that people are sceptical. I think people first think skincare won't work before they actually think it will work. So you have to kind of break that barrier down, which is why I think if you go with kind of more of the emotional factors, it's much more difficult to kind of gain that trust, versus what we've always said is if we kind of go out with a science approach and actually we just tell the truth. Because the truth is, not every product works for everyone, not every ingredient works for everyone. But if we're sharing, these are the ingredients, these are the concentrations, we say things where we don't actually really recommend the use of acids because there are a lot of downsides as well. We sell them because we want to offer a good version of a product that we know is popular and people are sourcing. But we'll always share our points of view, because I think the more education we can put into the hand of the audience, the more better we all are. And I think by not over promising and just instead stating the facts, I think the relationship is much better.
Are there any trends, whether that's to do with value or whether that's to do with product or marketing, that you have honed and learned during the last 12 months that you think you will continue using as the world comes out of pandemic and hopefully moves into, dare I say it, the next normal we've all been promised?
Probably not in terms of product. I mean, I guess you can say, we created a hand sanitizing gel that wasn't in our roadmap, but it's probably a product that will be here to stay, I think, after what's been happening. And I think the thing we've learned really is just around, the value of kindness, because I do think the way we have treated all of our people, and I mean, we have kept everyone, whether they're in retail or wherever they've been, everyone has kind of kept their employment, they've kept their salaries during the pandemic. So I think people will be remembered for how they've treated people, and I think that will be something as well which will be here to stay. I think there's been a lot of talk around the value and the business of kindness. I think Time magazine did an interesting piece on it a couple of months ago. So I think that's something that we will continue to see. And I hope the skincare boom continues, but I think, skin and colour over the next decade or however long, I think will always kind of interchange. And I know hair care is seeming to become a big category, and we're certainly seeing that with our hair density serum, which is suddenly becoming in our top 3 sellers for the first time in the last couple of years. But I think, the audience just wants transparency. They want conversations. They just want to be told the truth. They don't want to be overpromised and kind of under-delivered on kind of expectations. But I feel lucky that I think many of the things we were already doing have probably actually aligned with the pandemic, and it's probably why we have benefited so much from kind of what has happened in 2020. Probably the thing which, again, I don't know how much of a coincidence it was with timing, but we have definitely seen the value of TikTok in a way that I think we couldn't have probably been expected before. I mean, the views that a video can get in such a short time, the numbers are, staggeringly higher than Instagram, which we thought was kind of the be-all platform. And again, I think TikTok is just such an interesting place because the content just feels very authentic at the moment. And I'm sure in another few years, when brands have managed to kind of secure their TikTok strategies, it may all change again. But I think it has been just amazing to kind of see the voice of Gen Z and how actually it's kind of really moving things forward in the world.
So talking about moving things forward, you were very much the pioneers of the concept of the single ingredient and this very affordable scientific-backed skincare. Now, there have been many pretenders to the throne in the years between. How do you stay ahead when there are others kind of snapping at your heels?
We've always tried to not look at what others are doing, kind of just focusing on our own bubble. I guess 2 years ago, we moved into our new facility in Toronto, which is a 70,000 square foot facility. And we have over 100 people now working within our scientific team. And I believe we have one of the biggest R&D teams. We have got biochemists. We're doing building out all of our own clinical testing labs. So I believe our in-house capabilities are I hope leagues ahead of, I think, many of our kind of the people trying to steal our throne, so to speak. So I think by kind of having this continued focus on innovation and also the control of doing everything in-house, because I think ultimately that was one of the biggest factors in Deciem becoming the company it was, the fact that we created this whole ecosystem from formulation to manufacturing to design to PR, and you name it, we kind of brought it in-house. Nothing was outsourced, and it meant that at every step of the way you just had someone working with such passion, such commitment, really working as a team to create that perfect product and that perfect brand. So we will continue to do that, and I believe that the team will continue to come up with ideas that can always keep us ahead.
You've got quite a globally spread team and obviously a very global consumer base. How do you balance the different demands and again the different trends? What consumers are demanding in one region around the world might be very different elsewhere. Are you reliant on people being on the ground there, or that sort of data that you're gathering via social media? Is that where you get the input and I guess the cultural nuances, but also the consumer needs?
So we've always just had a focus on there being one human. So we actually haven't done anything that differs per country or per market. We obviously, when it comes to labelling, there are the regulatory differences that we have to comply with in each market. But we have never created a product specifically just for one market, or, pushed a campaign just for one market and not another.
That's fascinating, because that's so different to how other brands work. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I mean, have you ever been persuaded or thought, okay, now I expect that this skincare is going to be of more, benefit or need somewhere in the world because of ethnicity or again, kind of fashions and things that people might see? How have you stayed laser focused on just having one ideal consumer? That's amazing.
Well, I think, when we talk about the different, ultimately every market, Toronto, our home city, I think is one of the most diverse cities I've ever been in. So actually, when we're in all of these cities, they have such a diverse population that you have so many different skin groups anyway. And I think naturally you will see, perhaps SPF products may sell slightly higher in Australia or somewhere where they have kind of hotter weather for more parts of the year. But ultimately, I think our kind of focus is we create good products, we make them accessible to all. And if one sells slightly less and slightly more, that's okay kind of in that country. But I think we also have such an audience that moves around so much that I think just that kind of being available and ultimately always kind of just maximising the choice, I think is a key thing. And I know the audience get very frustrated where we have products that take our AHA peel, which is our number one product at the moment. We can't sell that in Australia, and I know that causes much frustration because of regulatory. So I think the more, if we were to do more separations that we would to choose to do, then I think it would become more difficult. And I also think, maybe partly we were a brand that we launched in 2013. So we have kind of grown up where actually social has been a big part of our kind of presence in our everyday. And I think, when you're a social brand, and this is one of the challenges we have at the moment, we have demand from so many countries around the world, from the Middle East to India, and it's difficult to kind of get into those markets quick enough because there are so many regulatory steps you have to get into before you can start selling in those countries. So we suddenly have to start thinking about how we can quickly upscale and to make our products accessible to all, because if we don't, then you start to get fake products appearing which aren't safe for consumers, and there are many more challenges. And I think, this is the difference between a brand who, launched 20 years ago would probably plan to launch a market at a time, and they look at a market, they would maybe have the time to kind of think through what are the differences, what do we kind of need to talk through here. Whereas I think for a brand that is kind of exploded or grown within the last few years, suddenly because of Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Google, your demand is all around the world very quickly. So you don't necessarily have time to kind of pick each country and actually kind of think how you need to tailor it. So I think this kind of one human approach, let's make everything accessible, that complies with the regulatories of each market, I think has just worked probably, and also matched the kind of pace of growth that we have found ourselves in.
Thank you. It's fascinating to hear. Now, we've pretty much run out of time, so I'm going to end things on the question that I ask all my guests at the end of these podcasts, which is, have you learned any new skills during the pandemic? And I'm not expecting you to, I don't know, have learned to do something crazy and amazing, but is there a new cocktail that you've learned? Have you taken up jigsaw puzzles, or maybe something more interesting? I think I'm just desperate for some ideas to get through the very boring evenings at the moment.
Well, I'm not sure my idea is very good because I had a second baby in the pandemic.
Okay, I'm definitely not going to tell my husband that was the idea that was put to me by my guest today.
I had I have a 2-year-old. My daughter turned 2 at the end of December, and we had a son who was born in October. So I think most of the pandemic, I feel like I haven't had chance to have much of a hobby, because obviously the last few months of pregnancy were figuring out how to get through this pandemic and what it meant. It was a new life event for all of us. And then obviously the last part of last year was dealing with 2 children under the age of 2 whilst trying to run Deciem at the same time. So sadly, I haven't had many hobbies, but I think, the things that I have learned is just the importance of staying calm, because, we're all in a situation where there's so much unknown, and I think it's hard. Sometimes it feels even harder now, because I think we always felt like the end was coming, and actually it keeps getting further away. So it feels like the unknown continues, and I think people start to get tired almost of just kind of not knowing where the end will be. But I think just trying to find a level of calmness and peace definitely helps. But I unfortunately haven't had the chance to learn any practical skills other than juggling 2 children.
Well, I'm definitely not going to be complaining about being too busy, that's for sure, in the next week at least. Nicola, thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you, and thank you for your honesty, telling us everything that's going on at Deciem at the moment. It was a pleasure chatting. Thank you so much to Nicola for agreeing to chat to me. I'd also like to thank you all for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, then please subscribe to the show, which is available on all major podcast platforms. And if you really like what you heard, then please leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. If you're interested in what we've been talking about today, then head over to WGSN.com, where you can find out how you can get access to all of our insight and analysis. We're constantly publishing new content around how you can design a better, brighter future. Thanks again to our guest, and I'd also like to thank our podcast producers, Roland Bodenham and Bethan Ryder. And again, thank you for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with some of our WGSN fashion experts. So until then, stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next time.